Hello and welcome to the course Basics of Experimental Design for Cognitive Psychology. I am Ark Verma from the Department of Cognitive Science at IIT Kanpur. This is the first week of the course, and we are trying to have a brief historical background about the evolution of methods in psychology. In today's lecture, I'll talk to you a little bit about I'll try and give you an overview of the qualitative research methods in psychology. Now, we've talked about this in the previous lecture. There were two possible paths. One is the closer to the natural sciences, approach, which basically is manifested best in the quantitative research paradigm. Whereas the other path is the one that was advocated by Dilthey and others, which basically say that there is this mental sciences approach which Dilthey talked about, and he said that psychology should follow something closer to that. So, psychology should go with the hermeneutic approach in trying to understand the individual in context in terms of their personal and social histories. So, let us try and see what are the assumptions that drive or that underlie this qualitative research methods approach. Now, one of the first and the most important things that is covered under qualitative research is that when we are talking about the variables of interest, qualitative researchers are actually not convinced about this objective reality. Remember, we were talking about this in the previous class, that the fundamental assumption of quantitative research methods is there is an objective reality, that reality exists outside the mind of an individual, and in that sense that is a shared reality about which about which when we make conclusions, these conclusions will apply to a large sample of people. On the other hand, qualitative researchers are not convinced that there is such an objective reality and that we can measure and quantify aspects of this objective reality. Reality under the qualitative approach is basically seen as constructed by different individuals and therefore influenced by their specific characteristics, their personal histories, their social histories, their aims, their motivations, their emotional experiences, their cognition, their way of thinking and looking at the world, and so on. So, it is very interesting that the fundamental assumption about the nature of reality is actually slightly different, quite different actually, between the quantitative and the qualitative research methods, and this is something that is the most fundamental aspect that we should keep in mind. Now, we are talking about controlling variables, we are talking about matching variables, not allowing the confounding or unplanned or irrelevant variables while we are making measurements. Qualitative researchers believe that these attempts to sanitize or control for variables basically makes this setting impoverished. It takes away the naturalness, it takes away the natural context of human behavior. So, whatever you measure at that point is not natural. It's the classic criticism against lab based studies. A lot of even us experimentalists, a lot of times we wonder that okay, we found this phenomena, this is how this particular phenomena, say for example visual search or this and that, they work in the lab. Do they work exactly in the same way outside the lab as well? This concept of ecological validity that keeps popping up. Alright, so qualitative researchers basically say that when you attempt to control for possible confounding variables, we over sanitize the environment, and this adds noise, and this basically does not really reveal the actual real world scenario. Rather, it turns the environment into an artificial setting that robs the participant of their natural ways of behaving and interacting with the environment. You remember in naturalistic observation, for example, if you see how Animal Planet and Discovery Channel make their documentaries about animals, they are not there, they are not intervening in how the animal is interacting with his environment. You're basically they've put the concealed cameras and gone away, and then came back and looked at the recordings and stitched them together through a narrative. Alright, so this is something that is a very important point that the qualitative researchers talk about. Now, also something that is very striking about qualitative research methodologies is they actually talk about and they acknowledge the possible influence of the researcher's role in this research enterprise. They say yes, the researcher may have an influence on how the data is collected, the method that are being followed, and the interpretations that are made consequently. They believe, however, that we should acknowledge this, and the cost benefit analysis is that this influence can be offset by a variety of factors. For example, the expected gains from such an enterprise are more because they allow us a more nuanced understanding of the situation, more nuanced understanding of the individual acting in that context or in that scenario. Also, conclusions, even those reached on the basis of quantitative research and falsification, are mostly relative. So, they say this is not very different from when you are actually carrying out their experiments in the laboratories. The most obvious biases, however, say for example, if you are conducting research on apartheid or social discrimination, and you are having a white male interview black males or females, obviously there are possible sources of bias, and they can basically be handled best by being aware of them rather than polishing over them. Alright. So, this is again something very interesting that qualitative researchers talk about. Qualitative researchers also talk about the importance of embedded understanding. They emphasize the role of an individual embedded in context. Okay. So, qualitative psychology or qualitative research methods seek to develop an understanding of the situation wherein the researcher and the researched are immersed in a given situation. The meaning of the situation can best be understood through such a paradigm is what the belief is. So, while the quantitative researchers approach a situation with a preconceived idea that okay, this is the situation, these are the variables, this is how we are going to study it, qualitative researchers typically enter a situation with an open mind. They say okay, let us observe, let us collect data, and we will see what variables play a part later, post facto, once the data has been collected, once we have captured the situation in all of its wholeness and richness. That is a very interesting sort of take on this. Okay. Now, what are you collecting data for? So, there is also a bit of a a contrast in the the approaches of the quantitative and the qualitative methods here, that under qualitative methods the emphasis is on immersion. The emphasis is on the fact that meaning implies that they are not really interested in generalizable knowledge. They are interested in the individual's personal social history, in the individual's emotion, volition, emotion, cognition and volition. They do not want to generalize this data to everybody else. They understand that individuals are unique, they understand that the situations are unique, and the behavior of an individual must be interpreted in the background, in the context of this unique situation. So, this is more this approach is referred to as the nomothetic approach, as opposed to the idiographic approach that is tied to the individual. Okay. Actually, I've mixed it. So, the nomothetic approach is where you are talking about searching for universal principles, and the idiographic approach is when you are tying it to the individual. So, the qualitative approaches are in that sense more idiographic. Also, what is the way of deducing knowledge? What is the way of coming up with this knowledge, synthesizing this knowledge? So, induction is a preferred way of creating knowledge as opposed to deduction. So, quantitative researchers basically often make use of predetermined variables because they have specific hypotheses which they are testing as part of the hypothetical deductive model. So, in that sense, the preferred way of reasoning is deduction. Whereas, on the other hand, the qualitative approach to research does not endorse this previously mentioned idea of making conclusions, because it carries the risk of the researcher missing the overall picture. You are focused on very specific phenomena and you are missing the overall picture. Remember the Gestalt schools, what they used to say. So, by focusing on details, researchers can easily lose sight of the wider picture, and is therefore extremely important to look at the situation with an open mind rather than fixating on a single detail. That's basically what the qualitative researchers feel. And in that sense, instead of constantly using deductive reasoning, qualitative researchers prefer following the method of inductive reasoning. They say, let's reason from fact to theory, let's observe the situation in all of its detail and richness, let's enlist our facts, let's list let's try to draw conclusion based on how all of these facts are linked together. What are the convergent impressions or observations that can be derived out of this? Again, the interesting thing here is that in the qualitative tradition, the data must be gathered and made available so that it can be verified by others, but the findings are typically not coded only in the numerical format. Rather, they comprise an organized set of verbal statements, interviews and phenomenal experiences, diaries and case studies, things like that. And these verbal statements are then, they basically are analyzed in different ways to get to the core of what data is there and what kind of evidence is there. For example, one of the ways to capture this rich information that the qualitative researchers are stressing is, say for example, carrying out semi-structured interviews. What are semi-structured interviews? The interviewer here uses a limited set of core questions but allows the participant to speak freely otherwise. So, for example, you want to capture the experience of people who are displaced by the tsunamis or the earthquakes and so on. So, you go there, you have your set of questions, you keep putting your questions intermittently, but for the most part you allow the participant to speak freely. Now, when you allow the participant to speak freely, what you are allowing for is that you are allowing for the whole picture to emerge, different aspects that you might not even have thought about before walking into the scene. So in that sense, the rich information is captured, the overall picture is better understood, and this is something that is one of the preferred methods when you're talking about qualitative research. Just as I said, two kinds of questions: open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are those that invite the interviewees to give their own point of view, to basically, what you basically are trying to do is you're not asking the researcher to deliver perspective-laden questions. So, for example, if you ask somebody, do you think the food is very good here? How do you like it? Once you've given this thing, you're already telling the person that, oh, he has to reply in a particular way. So these kind of questions are also called non-directive questions, where the question already hints or already directs what kind of answer is expected. So typically open-ended and non-directive questions are given where there is freedom for the participant to provide his or her own perspective, and non-directive questions, say for example, you don't start with, oh, the food is very good, do you also like it? You basically say, oh, do you like the food, something like that, which will not hint that a specific answer is already expected. Another type of technique that allows for capturing the rich information here is the use of what are called focus groups. So focus groups is basically when some semi-structured questions are given as the basis of discussion in a group setting. So you have a group of participants, say for example people discussing about any issue. Say for example the issue is whether a particular kind of tradition should be followed in a given society. So what you do is you create some questions around that particular topic, you have people come and sit together in a room, and then you just moderate the discussion, you instigate the discussion, and you let the participants exchange their opinions. And while you are gradually receded into the background and observing and documenting all of that. So focus groups sometimes also allow for getting a nice picture, getting an overall picture and the meaning of true meaning of overall situation. So that is also something that is preferred. Now, once you have data like this, once you have these semi-structured interviews, once you have these focus group discussions, how do you deal with this data? We are not doing frequency and tally kind of thing that the quantitative people were doing. So what do? We transcribe data, and then we analyze data for themes and so on. So for example, just to sort of describe it briefly, the data obtained from these semi-structured interviews typically consist of auditory or visual recordings that then need to be transcribed into text, and that this text can be analyzed to basically reveal categories and reveal themes, and these categories and themes basically give us a better idea of how this data is organized, what are the broad trends, what are the broad factors that are appearing from this data. So the investigator basically will dig into these raw materials. They'll develop, say for example, a flow chart of core ideas based on several close readings, iterative readings of the material. The researcher then tries to encompass this data as comprehensively and as systematically as possible, sieving through the material and churning the data to reveal more and more insights, as detailed insights as possible, trying to make sure that none of the aspects of the overall picture are missed. We'll sample a couple of methods within this qualitative tradition. Let us try and take some examples and see where things are. So for example, grounded theory. Grounded theory is one of the oldest methods within the qualitative tradition. This is supposed to be rooted from a book written by Glaser and Strauss in 1967. And what entails this grounded theory is here basically the interviewer is rewriting the raw material on the basis of questions. What kind of questions? What is going on here? So what is the situation like? What are the things that are happening? What are the main problems that you guys are facing? Or say for example, how do you try to solve them? So these are rather open-ended questions that can be posed about any phenomena to participants, and then you allow the participants to reveal their experiences and their thought processes to you. Later what you will do is these answers will be recoded into a sequence of themes, into a group of categories. They can be mapped in different ways, and then this categorization, according to Glaser and Strauss and others, basically will allow for a theory to emerge mainly through inductive reasoning. Say for example, you want to talk about experience of pain in terminal illness or something like that. So you start with something, how is your experience of illness X been, and then you let the participant speak, and then you hear the participant, you talk to many participants, you get some data, and then what you do is you start sieving through this, and different themes will start emerging. Say for example, the personal struggles, the familial struggles, the financial aspects, the aspects of being slightly helpless, the aspect of cooperation or non-cooperation from people around. And in that sense, grounded theory basically is trying to understand the overall situation, and this will be different for different individuals because the situations will be different and so on. But if you sort of put a bunch of these interviews together and you analyze them and you sieve them and you look at categories and flowcharts and so on, you might find that there are common themes across different experiences of terminal illnesses. You can in that sense it allows you a much deeper look. Okay, let's take one example that is been presented by Brisbane and Russell in this book, Historical and Conceptual Issues in Psychology. There is this study by Shaw and colleagues who were looking to examine academic procrastination using grounded theory. Now, academic procrastination is typically seen as a negative personality trait, but then nevertheless a lot of people do it. So what are the factors here? Let's try and see that. So this study involved 67 students over a total of 4 phases, starting from a combination of focus groups and semi-structured interviews, and then moving on to identifying themes which were found important with respect to procrastination. Let's see what is happening here. So these are the 4 phases. The first phase is open phase. You are trying to identify codes within categories for further analysis. 26 participants, 20 in focus groups, 6 in individual interviews that are participating here. Then you have the axial coding scheme, where you basically are trying to explore these codes in detail. You're trying to relate the codes to each other and construct these themes. What are the higher categories? So you're building on knowledge. You're making a more systematic sort of organization of this knowledge. Then what you can do is you can have more selective sort of an idea. So construct paradigm models and discuss the themes in relation to the model. What are the themes emerging? What is the model that we are looking at these themes through? So what is the guiding framework that basically we will use to interpret this data and the emerging themes? And then you test and validate and explicate the paradigm model until all the explanations are exhausted and saturated. So again, for each of these things you will see a different number of participants are involved in each of these let's say progressive steps in coming towards this this data. You can see, for example, what kind of questions have been used. So how do you describe academic procrastination? What do you do typically when you procrastinate? Are there situations in which you are more likely to procrastinate than others? How do you cope with when you procrastinate? How do you deal with that? What are some of the positive and negative consequences of procrastination? So you'll see that there are a bunch of these questions, and these questions basically lead to different categories. For example, you can see there are coping strategies. So some of these codes basically can correspond to, oh, what are the coping strategies that people typically use, or what are the consequences of procrastination that people experience, and what are the contributing factors. So antecedents of procrastination, what are the contributing factors to procrastination? And you will see that there are these codes on the right side, which may correspond to these specific categories of analysis. Yeah, so here you can see there, and then you say sort of you're sieving the data, you are more a nicer picture is emerging. So you have these macro themes: antecedents of procrastination. Maybe it is linked to the kind of task you are supposed to do. It's a too difficult task, too uninteresting task, maybe there is a higher chance to procrastinate. Self characteristics, teacher characteristics. Then you have among coping strategies, there are cognitive coping strategies, there are affective coping strategies, there are consequences. So within consequences, there are two themes that are emerging: quality of life. How does procrastination affect your quality of life? How does procrastination affect the quality of work that you're going to do? So you can see here very systematically from these broad categories to these themes, a nicer picture is emerging, and it is a systematic overall picture of how procrastination happens that emerges out of this. All right. Eventually, on the basis of the model that they discovered in this previous slide that we were seeing, this is the broader model. They basically distilled 6 principles that affect students' procrastination. For example, they found out that minimum time, students have busy lives with the following sequence of priorities: personal relationships, work and study. The amount of study time is minimized to maximize the time available for friends, for family, for having work and so on. So procrastination typically is an interesting tool that enables students to delay as much study as possible until the last weeks of the semester, just when the exams are about to happen. Optimum efficiency, there's a saying which I've often heard, is that the work expands to fill whatever time you allot it. So for example, if you have to do something, you give it 5 weeks, it will take 5 weeks to be done. You give it 1 week, it will be finished within 1 week. So some kind of optimizing strategy. Maybe students look at procrastination as an optimizing strategy as well. Rewards, there are rewards also associated with procrastination, such as there is more rapid feedback because you're doing it at the last time, you're submitting your assignment on the last day, and the teacher is supposed to give you the feedback the next day. So immediately the feedback is there. So you can see how again, I'm not really a qualitative researcher, so I'm not really going into a lot of detail about this, but you can see I guess that how does the grounded theory approach help in developing interesting insights in the behavior of procrastination. Remember, we are not following the experimental method here. We are not controlled for any number of variables. We are not controlled for the type of participants that are used. We have not controlled for the type of sittings that are used, but we have gone out and generally collected data with a bunch of people. Yes, some kind of factors have gone into the sampling and so on, but this is allowing us to get a more general holistic picture of procrastination. Now, another interesting methodology that is used within the qualitative tradition is the phenomenological analysis. But why does this come up? Because there are some shortcomings of the grounded theory that were pointed out. For example, the assumption within the theory that there is an object. See, in some sense, you will see the way the grounded theory works, it still is working towards an objective reality, which is closer to the quantitative tradition and the mainstream psychology than qualitative issues. Another is that grounded theory stresses the importance of inductive reasoning and verification, both of which we have seen are in some sense difficult to sort of defend and were eventually discarded by 20th century philosophy of science people. Finally, one important problem with grounded theory was that it does not really take into account that the data that is provided by the participants actually comprises mainly of their perceptions and interpretations of so it did not really take into account the perception and interpretation of individuals. In some sense it became apparent that grounded theory had found its origin in sociology, where you are talking about an individual embedded in society. So when you're collecting data, when you are sieving and making these broader categories, what you're doing is you're still performing some kind of generalization. You're not really doing a person centric the preferred idiographic kind of analysis that is required. You're not diving deep into what does procrastination, for example, mean, if you take this particular case in example, for a given individual in question. Alright, so to address some of these concerns, psychologists stress that the primary aim of qualitative research should be to examine what reality looked like for the individual participants, and it should give enough scope to the view of person dependent reality in contrast to the view of objective person independent reality. Okay, so this is something that that was leveled as a criticism against grounded theory. Now, Husserl's phenomenology. So, some of this, some of the criticisms or some of the newer, inspiration was drawn from Edmund Husserl as well. And Husserl's phenomenology emphasizes that psychology should be a reflective study of an individual's consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. Okay, so again, let's not generalize. Let's dive deeper and let's pay more attention to the individual in picture. Okay, so it seems if you look back, that psychology has been mostly eager or too eager in some sense to study the objective reality, the world, than say for example the world as compared to the way in which the world is perceived by individual entities. In that sense, when you want to have that kind of view of reality, what one does is one approaches this investigation with artificial concepts, artificial variables that you have created, and in that sense these variables are not capturing the actual experience of the individual, and that is something that Husserl offers, that can be captured or should be captured by newer methods, one of them being the interpretative phenomenological analysis. So let's talk a little bit about this interpretative phenomenological analysis. Now, IPA proceeds by systematically going through the transcriptions and identifying themes that can be clustered into higher order categories, but the categories are made in such a way that they capture the essence of the phenomena under investigation. It is centered more on how participants make sense of their personal and social world. It attempts to explore the personal experience more than the shared and generic experience. Questions, for example, how do you elicit these responses that will give you this information is, how is this perceived by you? How do you perceive procrastination? What does it mean for you? Not about what is procrastination in general, but what does it mean for you? Why would you do that? Okay, what meaning does the participant, so how do you view your tendency to procrastinate? How do you say, for example, and how does it, what kind of individual consequences this has for you? Okay, so questions broadly are similar, open-ended, semi-structured questions, but the focus of the questions is different. Now the focus is not the phenomena in general, but the individual's experience of the phenomena, and this is some difference between the IPA and the grounded theory, it seems. Okay, also the IPA acknowledges the input from the researcher, as do some of the other things, other traditions within qualitative psychology, that what is the, so you can look at data and you can basically ask questions like, what is the person trying to achieve here? What kind of contribution is the person actually making in terms of eliciting the truths that the person is after? Okay, and therefore you can sort of acknowledge it, and you can basically guard against the individual biases creeping in. Say, for example, when the person is taking this interview, is something else leaking out there which is not the the phenomenal individual experience of the participant we are studying. Okay, so see, as the qualitative approaches generally say, it is better to acknowledge and be aware of the possible influences of the researcher rather than just assuming that there is no influence from the researcher in the research enterprise. Broadly, just summing up some of the highlighted, some of the key elements of IPA as highlighted by Reed and colleagues, that IPA is an inductive approach. It goes from data to understanding, is not concerned with testing hypotheses and prior assumptions. It's a more open-ended sort of approach. You go, you discover, and then you make categories later. It aims to capture and explore the meanings that the participants individually assign to their own experiences, and the participants are treated as the best experts on the, so there is no guided thing telling the participants that you answered in these terms and so on. It aims to reduce the complexity of the raw data through rigorous and systematic analysis. So again, developing categories and so on. The analyses are broadly interpretative, and researchers are also encouraged to reflect upon their own role in this process. So let's look at some example. So Dixon and colleagues, for example, they were looking at the experiences of people living with the chronic fatigue syndrome. So this is a disorder, and they wanted to understand using IPA the experiences of people who underwent this chronic fatigue syndrome. So what did they do? They had semi-structured interviews, in-depth interviews with 14 patients. Each participant was interviewed individually through a number of non-directive open-ended questions which were used in a flexible way. For example, tell me about your experience with CFS, not about CFS how it generally is. What aspects of your life has CFS impacted most? What are the ways in which your life gets affected by CFS, and how have the other people reacted to your condition? How are people around? So now you can see the stress is more upon the individual, the experiences of the individual, the experience of the individual in relation to the personal and social history, and so on. Okay. What comes out of is, say for example, they discovered that there are three recurrent but interrelated themes that come out. There is this idea of identity crisis, agency, and embodiment. So this theme comprised a feeling of personal loss characterized by profound diminishing personal control. See, if you're tired all the time, chronic fatigue syndrome is basically when a person experiences tiredness all the time, does not have strength to do something. Okay, so this is exemplified by the statement such as by an individual that CFS seems to be CFS is a dictator. It dictates my everyday life. It determines what I can and cannot do. It controls my body and my mind and every part of my being. So here you can see that the participant is talking about the individual experience with CFS. Is not talking about how CFS is experienced by a large number of people, but his own individual or her own individual experience. Also, another theme that you can see here that emerges is skepticism and the self. So this theme typically refers to difficulties in social interactions because of the skepticism about the wider society. Something like, say for example, how is the person feeling in relation to the society, becomes less trusting of the overall system. So you can see this in this excerpt from an interview. Well, people thought you were a malingerer. It's not that you're not afflicted from a disease, but you are just like that. You are a malingerer. You basically linger on and you sort of delay things and so on. That you were at it, you were trying to consciously do something, and there was this idea that you were just lazy. Okay, this led to a sense of crisis of the self. I started thinking to myself, am I just making this up? Is it all in my head? So you can see this skepticism and self-doubt that arises out of an individual's experience with chronic fatigue. Okay, so this is basically just a demonstration of how the IPA might lead to a slightly deeper picture of the individual experience when you're considering particular phenomena. Now, this is just a very broad survey of qualitative research. I have not covered it exhaustively, and I will not pretend to know all the nitty-gritties about this, but this overview tells us a few things. Okay, it tells us that there are certain strengths in qualitative research. For example, it is more focused on understanding situations and solving problems, understanding the individuals in all of their totality, understanding the human experience in totality, as Dilthey would say. It also can lead to generation of new ideas and elaboration of theories. Once you start discovering these themes, you can actually come up with newer ideas. You will probably discover a world of variables that you had not even thought about if you had gone with a narrow and scaffolded view of how a particular phenomena works. You let people talk, you let their experience shine, and in that sense you will probably you are giving yourself a better chance of understanding the phenomenon in its totality. It is also more perceptive to the needs of the participants. See, what is the purpose of conducting psychological research in the first place? So, qualitative methods, it seems, are more perceptive to the individual experience, are more perceptive to what the participants need. Okay, so in that sense, these are strengths of this overall method. But again, there are some limitations as well. For example, the broadly preferred methods are inductive reasoning and verification. We have discussed in the past about possible pitfalls with the method of verification. We have discussed the possible pitfalls about inductive reasoning. Also, which theory do you choose? We saw two examples, grounded theory and IPA. There can be other theories like discourse analysis and so on. How do you choose? Because each theory will give you some aspect of the truth, probably the whole truth, if you go by those respective theorists. How do you choose? What is it that you're looking for? Say, for example, in quantitative methods, we can choose between descriptive, correlational and experimental research, because we can say, oh, we want to decipher causal relationships, and the experimental method allows us the best chance to decipher causal relationships. In qualitative methods, you're not in the best position to decide how this would work. All right. Also, this is broadly based on introspection. So, while it's interesting and gives a lot of insight when you're talking to participants, in the grounded theory approach or in the IP approach, the excerpts I was reading out, but most of these are excerpts that are participants' excerpts based on their introspection. Okay, and again, if you've done any simple course on history of psychology, you will know that introspection has its own pitfalls. Sometimes, our ideas about a particular experience are colored by several other factors. We might not, we might not be experts in our own experiences after all. Something like that. Also, there is obviously always a chance of the researcher playing an important part in the kind of outcomes that you get. See, for example, when you're describing your troubles and your problems that you're facing, your experiences, I'm sure they will be different when you're talking to a friend, to a stranger, or to a family member. All right, and in that sense, there is, it seems, a very important role of the researcher in this research enterprise. Yes, the general qualitative research theory basically says that you acknowledge it and you find ways to get around it. Okay, so again, this is probably all that I will talk about today. This was just a very brief overview of qualitative research enterprise. In the next week, we'll start with a more focused discussion on quantitative research methods. We'll go into detail about some of the experimental designs and so on. Thank you.